Good morning. My name is Katie Kelly, and I am the World Affairs Events Manager for Global Minnesota. I'm very excited to welcome you all to our informative webinar on exploring international careers in the U.S. government. For a quick background about the organization hosting this discussion today, Global Minnesota is a nonpartisan, nonprofit membership organization dedicated to advancing international engagement and understanding. For nearly 75 years, we've provided people with a gathering place where they can connect with influential world leaders, gain exposure to different cultures and viewpoints, and hear firsthand insights into critical international topics. Every year, we host over 70 insightful and interactive events on a variety of global topics, including foreign policy, international business, world travel, cultural exploration, and much more. For those of you joining from outside of Minnesota, many of our programs also offer virtual participation, and events are recorded and available for streaming on our events archive at globalminnesota.org or on YouTube and podcast platforms. Speaking of podcasts, you can also hear untold stories of global connection on the Global Minnesota podcast, which has previously featured two of our participants today, Susan Flatko and Penelope Thomas. Finally, Global Minnesota is a member-based organization, so we encourage you all to consider supporting Global Minnesota to help keep events like this free of charge to continue connecting the world with our local communities. Right now, new members will also receive 2 free tickets to attend our premier foreign policy event on January 23rd, which features a look ahead at the main priorities for U.S. policy in 2025. Today, we're here to look at the many options for global careers in the federal government. Navigating the numerous possibilities for international jobs in the U.S. government can be both exciting and overwhelming, but we've assembled an impressive panel of federal government professionals to provide insights and advice. These individuals have joined to share exciting new opportunities and hiring tracks, including what skills might benefit you and how to get started. I'd like to welcome our panel participants today. We have joining us Susan Flatko, the diplomat in residence for the Midwest region in the U.S. State Department. We have Alicia Hernandez, the Senior Director for North and South Asia Operations in the Foreign Agricultural Service in the USDA. We have Penelope Thomas, the Development Diplomat in Residence South Region in USAID, and Doug Jacobson, the Career Development and Assignments Officer in the Office of Global Talent Management in the U.S. Department of Commerce. Those are a lot of titles, so I'm really looking forward to you all explaining a little bit more about what you actually do and what those things mean. But I just wanted to say thank you all for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and your expertise. We're going to start with Susan Flatko and move through each of the presentations before we get to Q&A at the end. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box and as we go along, and we'll get to as many as possible at the end of all of the presentations. With that, I will turn it over to you, Susan, to get us started. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie, and thanks to Global Minnesota for giving us this opportunity. My name is Susan Flatko, and I am with the U.S. Department of State. Today, we've got a great panel, and we're going to be talking about the different foreign affairs agencies that we have in the U.S. government. Department of State is only just one, and so I'm glad to have my colleagues from some of the others here today. I have been a diplomat, a foreign service officer for 25 years. And right now I'm recruiting for Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So that is why I'm here today. I do have a presentation that I want to share with you. It won't be too long, but I'm doing this because there are a lot of, I'm going to throw a lot of information at you, and some of it is just going to be better if you have a visual, I think. I'm also going to share my contact information. And so if you've got a phone, you can take that out and you can take a look at it now. So you can record some of the stuff that I'm putting in here. I'm also going to ask you that if you are interested, you can check in. This is the U.S. Department of State, the Talent Network. If you think you might be interested in additional information, I send out a newsletter. We do lots of different webinars, and I would invite you to go ahead and register via this QR code. I'll put it in the chat later as well, in case you miss it, but I just wanted to start with that, and I will put it up again at the end. So about the State Department, I don't know if anyone's seen this show. The second season has just come out. Who Are We? So this is a great, it's kind of fun. It's a fun show. Carrie Russell is the U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom, and she's kind of running around and schmoozing with the foreign minister. And doing these backroom negotiations, which I suppose there's kind of a little bit of that in what we do, but I would say not a whole lot. And so although it's a fun show, it's not entirely accurate. What we are, in fact, is the nation's first cabinet agency, the oldest cabinet agency. First Secretary of State is a name you will know, Thomas Jefferson. We're not that big, especially if you compare it to something like the Department of Defense. And especially when you look at the fact that fewer than 14,000 of us serve overseas as Foreign Service employees. We do have domestic employees who work in the United States in the civil service. And then actually the bulk of our staff is local staff who we hire in the countries where we are present. But ultimately, I think some of the biggest questions people have for us in the United States is, why do we even have all these embassies? Why do we bother? And some others will say, well, I'm sure it's so that we can help other countries. That is a role that the United States government plays. And one of my colleagues, or all of my colleagues, will actually have a good story about that. But for the Department of State, ultimately, we are there for American citizens. We are there to ensure the security and the prosperity of Americans through working with our allies, through working with countries we are not allies with, by shaping the international environment to make it such that Americans can thrive. We are located around the world. We are in almost every country, but not every country. There are a few where we do not have a presence, such as North Korea, Syria, Iran. There's a few like that. But most countries, we do have a presence. This lovely building here, this picture, is our headquarters, the State Department in Washington. And we do have some offices located around the United States. Typically, our passport agencies we will have in some major cities, and we have some other administrative functions around the country as well. In terms of policy, what do we do? There seems to be, I think, a bit of a misconception that you have to be a political science major to join the U.S. Department of State. And if you look at this list of issues, this is not even a complete list. These are just some of the things that we work on because they have an international component. So you can see we're not just looking for political scientists. We need people who understand science and technology and women's issues and terrorism and cyber. So a little bit of everything. So there is a place for, I would say, almost everybody in the State Department because we are looking for all kinds of expertise. What that means is we hire all majors, especially for our diplomatic positions. You can be any major and we would hire you. There are different ways, different kinds of jobs in the Foreign Service. The first one I want to talk about is generalists. This is what I am. I'm an economic officer. I've been in, as I said, for 25 years. And political and economic officers, two different career tracks, but very similar jobs. We are the eyes and ears for Washington overseas. We are meeting people, building relationships so that we can explain to Washington, we are basically analysts. We are explaining to Washington what we think a country will do to something that we are doing or how they might vote in the United Nations. So we are kind of explaining that country to Washington and answering the questions that Washington has about it. Public diplomacy officers, these are folks who are the voice of the embassy. They are responsible for working with the press, for essentially trying to shape public opinion in favor of US policies and values. They work directly with the public as well. We have cultural exchange programs, we have educational exchange programs, all designed to really build those people-to-people connections between the United States and other countries. Consular officers are responsible for helping American citizens overseas. That's everything from replacing a lost passport to helping with an evacuation if there is some kind of a natural disaster or a crisis. They also are responsible for issuing visas to foreigners who want to travel to the United States. And then finally, we also need people to manage our embassies. So we hire management officers to do everything from human resources to budget, logistics, contracting, all of that. But for all of our Foreign Service generalists, which you may also have heard the term Foreign Service officer, that's what this refers to, most of your career will be spent overseas. typically 2 to 3 years at an assignment, and then you move on to another assignment. We hire specialists as well in the Foreign Service, and as the name suggests, they are going to either have more specialized training or a specialized role in the State Department. So we have an entire law enforcement branch. We hire administrative specialists to do human resources, financial management, etc. The difference between the specialist and the generalist, the management generalist is going to learn all of those business functions and will eventually oversee the administrative specialist. But for the financial management specialist, for example, you do have to have a specific degree, for example, accounting, to be a financial management specialist. And then you will always do financial management. We hire engineers because we build embassies. We have an entire IT section. We have IT at every overseas posting. So we need what we call diplomatic technology officers. We hire doctors and nurse practitioners and psychiatrists and physician's assistants. They are the primary care provider for our diplomats overseas in certain countries where the healthcare system is not adequate. We also have resource centers like libraries, and we do English language programming. So we hire librarians. We hire folks who teach English as a second language. So for all of these specialists, the same thing applies because it is the Foreign Service. Most of the career will be spent overseas. We also have a temporary, a limited 5-year appointment for people who speak Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin, or Arabic. This is, we bring people in as consular officers on a temporary basis to help clear out some of the backlogs we have in interviewing foreigners for visas. And so if we bring you in as a consular fellow, it's a 5-year appointment. We will typically send you to 2 countries in that time. It's not a permanent position, but a lot of people who come in as a consular fellow decide they really like it, and then they make the jump to the Foreign Service permanent career. All right, I'm going to say one other thing. The way in to all of these different generalists, specialists, and consular fellows is through a test. For the generalists, the test is offered typically 3 times a year. That could change, but right now we've been offering it every February, June, and October. That is how you begin an application for a generalist. All 5 of these career tracks take the same test. The specialists also take a test, but it's going to be specific to the specialty. A lot of these are open on a rolling basis all year round, and you can look on our careers website, careers.state.gov, to see which ones are currently open. And then our Consular Fellows program is also open year round on a rolling basis. You could apply any day. If you have questions, you can email me directly if you're from Illinois, Minnesota, or Wisconsin. I do online office hours. You can email me at dirmidwest@state.gov to ask for an appointment. Everything I've talked about today is on our careers website at careers.state.gov. And I invite you to follow me on LinkedIn as Diplomat in Residence Midwest. Don't look for my name because I do have a personal page, but I don't really use it. You want to follow me at Diplomat in Residence Midwest. Because this is online, I know you're not all from Minnesota or Illinois or Wisconsin. So this is a picture. This QR code will get you to the map where you can find the diplomat in residence who covers your own region. There are 17 of us. We cover the entire country. So please go ahead and take a picture of this if you're interested in connecting with someone and you're not in Minnesota, Wisconsin, or Illinois. And then finally, I'm going to put this up one last time. This is how you can join my talent network to receive newsletters and more information on our careers. And I will also put some of these in the chat as we're talking. So I'm going to go ahead and end here and stop my share so we can go on to our next panelist. Thanks, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Susan. I really appreciate it. And I see questions are already coming in the chat. That's wonderful. Please keep that up. We'll try to get to as many as we can. And as Susan mentioned, if you have maybe specific questions about your situation or your set of skills and you'd like to direct them to Susan, you can definitely send her an email. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Penelope Thomas to talk a little bit more about her work at USAID. Thanks so much, Penelope.
Hi, thank you again to you, Katie, for the personal invitation, and to Global Minnesota for hosting this session. I think it's very important to complement the work that we do. I, like Susan, work as a foreign service officer, and my last post was Pakistan. I've served in approximately 12 posts and have served temporary duty in approximately an additional 10. I've coming up on my 25th year anniversary in the federal government in March of next year. And I'd like to just share with you, for the next 10 years, for the next 10 minutes, a little bit about what USAID does. So on November 3rd in 1961, President John F. Kennedy established USAID. And over the past 6 decades, we've been partnering with countries and governments all around the world to improve health, education, economic prosperity. We have approximately 13,000 staff members, and our ceiling is about 2,000 foreign service officers, although we're a little bit below that now. We're at approximately 1,960 foreign service officers. And we work in more than 100 countries. And what does USAID do? We do work at an embassy along with some of our other panelists that are going to be on this call today overseas. But usually one mission, one team. We all report ultimately to the ambassador, who is the president's personal representative. And USAID leads the United States government's international development and disaster response efforts globally. And that really helps us advance US national security and economic prosperity, leading to more stable nations. So we help save lives, we reduce poverty, we strengthen democratic governance, and some of our priorities, which priorities change, because I know people are going to have that question. Priorities do change with each administration, which is pretty normal. But our current priorities are responding to global food insecurity crisis, addressing climate crises, promoting democracy, countering corruption, protecting dignity, freedoms, and human rights, strengthening global health, security, fighting emergent health threats. We also do what's called inclusive development, in which we work with implementing partners to carry out our programs, right? Because USAID, we don't work in every country around the world, but we do sometimes have what's called non-presence countries. And we have implementing partners who sometimes we give money to them in the form of a grant or the form of a cooperative agreement, where we say, okay, this is what we need done. They bid, they win the specific procurement mechanism. But our inclusive development helps us broaden our partnerships, include diverse people and partners, listen to the needs of the people that we're partnering with, and help us include the most marginalized population to make sure that we are providing equitable assistance. So some of the questions that you may ask: in what areas do we address? So that's furthering education, promoting shared economic prosperity, strengthening democracy and good governance. For example, when I served in Nigeria, I was able to actually go out to the field and monitor the elections that Nigeria was hosting, to see how they do their elections. And then we kind of partner with them to say, okay, we want to make sure that elections are free, fair, credible, equitable. And I'll just pause for a second to tell you this little interesting story. But as I was monitoring the elections, I noticed a couple different things. Number one was I didn't see anybody that was there to help people that were visually impaired or that were physically impaired. And so one of my questions is, so what are we doing for people that are in wheelchairs? How are we making it easier for them to go and vote, because the voting polling station where I went to, although it was in a school, it was still on a dirt road, and you know, the steps, there were steps. There was not an off ramp or an on ramp for someone that might be in a wheelchair. And so those were kind of some of the things that I was, you know, asking, just kind of putting myself in that situation. So that's where we kind of serve as an advisor in some of those areas. And then I have to say that after all of the ballots were cast, people will put their ballots in. A group of, I'm going to call them bandits for lack of a better word, they came and they came with these cans of paint, and they poured the paint all over the ballots. And immediately, as Foreign Service officers, we had to be removed from the area, because, you know, we try obviously not to get into you know, situations in which our life could be put in danger. But that's an example of something that USAID does. I don't know how we ultimately ended up addressing that, because we did have to leave the area for security reasons. But those are some of the things that we help try to prevent. You know, and that's what our democracy officers do. So that's why I mean, when I say strengthen democracy and good governance programs, we protect human rights, improve global health. During the COVID pandemic, we were receiving vaccinations and syringes, and going out into the field and making sure that this was when I was in Pakistan, making sure that we could provide COVID vaccinations and syringes, you know, receiving a large shipment coming from the United States. We also advance food security and agriculture and improve environmentally stable, try to make sure that the environment is stable, and help societies prevent and recover from conflicts, and provide humanitarian assistance in the wake of natural and man-made disasters. When I was in Pakistan, for example, they were ravaged by floods in June of 2021, I believe it was. But in any case, we had to shift our strategy and make sure that we could provide economic relief for the people that were suffering from floods. So there's a lot that we do. I've kind of given some examples of global health and democracy and in climate change. And so in terms of our careers, we have foreign service officers, civil service officers, and we provide fellowships. And for the foreign service, similar to kind of what my colleague Susan talked to, we have a lot of different foreign service career tracks. We have education, environment, agriculture, private sector, financial management, administrative management, health, humanitarian assistance, legal officers, engineering. And so we have a wide variety. And you might ask, what do I need? What kind of credentials do I need for you know, to apply for USAID? You don't have to take the foreign service exam, but you do have to have a master's degree. So that's kind of the difference there. And that could be a master's in public health, a master's in business administration, international relations, public administration, public policy, a law degree, economics, agriculture economics, education. You must be a US citizen, and foreign service officers must be cleared to the top secret level, which could take up to 4 or 5 months, especially if you've lived overseas. You also have to have a medical clearance to be worldwide available. And we must receive your official transcripts from your university to make sure that you are, that you do have a master's. I think I'm going to stop there so I don't go over time for the next speaker, but you can reach me out, and I know Katie will probably send this out. You can reach me at pathomas@usaid.gov. I too have office hours. They're a little diminished this now since we're going into the end of the year, and I'm going to be taking some leave, but starting in January, my office hours are usually every Tuesday and Thursday. And if you email me, I can send you the link to my calendar where you can go in and set up an appointment with me and just, you know, try to find out the best the best time that's available to you. If you do have a master's and you are looking for a job at USAID, I suggest that you go to usajobs.gov. That is where all of our vacancies are going to be posted. And if you want to just know a little bit more about USAID, it's usaid.gov/careers. And again, I can put those links, if Katie hasn't already done so, into the chat. So consider a career at USAID. We really do help make a difference in the world as the world's premier international development agency in the federal government. Thank you. And I don't have any slides to share. I know that there were going to be lots of slides, so I was just talking very quickly, but you can ask any questions that you need to me personally or during the question and answer session. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Penelope. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I see the questions are continuing to come in. We will get to, I know Susan has been answering a few in the chat directly, and we will get to many more in the Q&A after all the presentations have wrapped up. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our next speaker, Doug Jacobson from the U.S. Commercial Service. Doug, whenever you are ready, please take it away.
Great, thank you so much. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in the program today. Thanks to Global Minnesota for the opportunity to speak for a few minutes just about international careers at the U.S. Department of Commerce, especially I think in the Foreign Commercial Service officer side where I spend most of my time. I was eager to accept this invitation, not only because I love my job as a Foreign Service officer and I love working at the Department of Commerce, but because I'm from Minnesota, as you likely saw in my bio. I'm currently based in Washington, D.C., working at Commerce headquarters. But as similar to the previous speakers, I've spent most of my career, my Foreign Service career overseas in Tokyo, Toronto, Ho Chi Minh City, most recently in the Czech Republic. But I still call Minnesota home and like to get back to the cities often to visit family in Bloomington. So, and also wanted to thank in particular Katie Kelly for helping to facilitate the program. So, like I said, very excited to talk about careers in the Foreign Commercial Service. The Foreign Commercial Service is an agency under the U.S. Department of Commerce. It's one of the Foreign Service agencies. I think most people, when they think of U.S. diplomats and Foreign Service officers, they immediately think of the State Department, which is a large agency, a lot of Foreign Service officers, thousands, I believe. The Foreign Commercial Service within the Department of Commerce is a little bit different. We have approximately 250 officers, and we focus primarily on promoting and protecting U.S. commercial interests overseas. We do this through kind of three buckets: export promotion, commercial diplomacy, and then lastly, inward foreign direct investment promotion coming into the United States. We have offices in about 120 cities overseas and about 80 markets, mostly in embassies and consulates, U.S. embassies and consulates. And then we have about 100 or so U.S.-based offices. The Minneapolis office, for example, it's actually not that far from U.S. Bank Stadium. And that's I spent some time working there at the very front end of my career. So basically, our focus is on economic development. I'd say our bread and butter is to help U.S. firms, particularly small and medium-sized companies, export their goods and services overseas. So, for example, like an XYZ Mendota Heights manufacturer of chemical water treatment equipment or chemicals, let's say, is trying to export their products over to Southeast Asia. So the Department of Commerce can provide assistance in that area. So on the U.S. side, the folks in Minneapolis, for example, my colleagues there could assist the Minnesota company assess their export readiness, maybe website or social media optimization to help their marketing efforts, helping on the logistics front, looking at how to get the product from Minnesota to Vietnam, let's say, or Thailand, for example. And then once the company is ready, they've done their market research, then overseas, for example, when I was in Ho Chi Minh City, then we would work with the Minnesota company to help them find distributors, sales agents, and in some cases, direct to end users, for example. So that's kind of the export promotion side of the house. The other area that we work in is commercial diplomacy. So we help companies that are maybe having some issues with market access and compliance. Maybe the Minnesota company is looking to bid on a public sector tender. So then we as the federal government, in tandem with some of our State Department colleagues or Department of Defense colleagues, we can advocate on behalf to the foreign government decision makers. And then lastly, I'd say, on the investment promotion side, because I am a federal government, I work for the federal government, we have to be more geographically neutral when we promote foreign direct investment into the United States. But if a Czech company, Czech-based manufacturer wants to set up shop in the United States and maybe 3 other countries, I'm essentially kind of a cheerleader for the United States. I can't direct them into, Minnesota or Wisconsin or Illinois. So we just try to be, a cheerleader, geographically neutral cheerleader until they make that decision. And if they are looking to set up shop in Minnesota or Illinois or Wisconsin, for example, or California, then we help be a resource broker for them to make introductions to the state jurisdiction or the municipality in general. So hopefully that's helpful to give you an idea of what we do. Day of the life of a Foreign Service Officer includes, at least on the commercial service side, working with U.S. companies. Maybe it's a Minnesota company that's looking to export their goods and services to the market where the officer sits. It includes managing a team of foreign nationals, Vietnamese nationals, Czech nationals, that work for the United States government to help promote and protect U.S. commercial interests in those markets. It could be, discussing market access and compliance issues with foreign government counterparts. So that gives you an idea. For me, this has been a dream career. I'm super passionate about public service. I love representing the United States overseas, no doubt. It can be a challenging career for sure, because FSO, Foreign Service Officers, whether you're with state, USAID, agriculture, or commerce, you're kind of uprooting lives, your own life and your family's lives every, let's say between 2 and 4 years, often to some very challenging locales. So, but for people who love to work and live abroad and experience different cultures and customs and languages and people of different nations, it's really a dream career like none other. So lastly, I would say, if you're interested in exploring careers at the Department of Commerce, maybe it's specific to foreign service officers, I would encourage you to go to usajobs.gov and do a search there. You can set up your profile. Penelope had mentioned the Foreign Service Assessment, and Susan had mentioned that, she referenced that as well. The Foreign Commercial Service within the Department of Commerce has a different version of the assessment. We don't have any assessments on the books right now, no timeline for that, but we're exploring one, hopefully for next year, but a lot will go into that. So I think on that note, I'll be quiet and look forward to any Q&A that might come up at the end. Thanks. Katie, back to you.
Thank you so much, Doug. I really appreciate it. And we'll get to a few questions that I saw in the chat for Doug at the end as well. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Alicia from the Foreign Agricultural Service to kick off our last presentation before we switch over to Q&A. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. And yes, as she said, I'm Alicia Hernandez. I'm a Foreign Service Officer with the USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service. Most of my focus today will be explaining what FAS does and kind of where we overlap and where we differ as well from some of the other foreign service agencies who have spoken to you today. To start off, a little bit of my bio if you didn't get to see it. I am a Foreign Service Officer with FAS. I've been in FSO for about 12 years. My first assignment overseas was Mexico City, Mexico. And I was there for about 4 years and then transferred to Hong Kong. My most recent assignment was in Poland, covering 6 countries in Central and Eastern Europe. And recently I've come back to Washington, D.C., and I'm in a role that does operational support for our officers and their families overseas, whether that's helping them actually get a ticket and get on a plane to their next assignment, or making sure the budgets get out. All sorts of different things kind of come up every day. But we do quite a few different things, and I'd like to share a little bit more about that with you. Hopefully you can see this. slide. Possible. And if I could get any confirmation if someone can see anything, I'd appreciate it.
We can see your slides. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Everyone is, especially, I think as mentioned earlier, IT is very important in the government. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So thank you so much. So our motto is linking US agriculture to the world. And we do this by kind of a couple different ways. Oh, sorry. For us, we have kind of different pillars of our work. When we think of analysis, that's a lot of reporting and a lot of writing. But actually, a lot of us find that to be some of the most interesting parts of our job. We also do trade policy and trade promotion, kind of similar to what Doug was alluding that the Foreign Commercial Service does. And we do some capacity building and food security work as well, that kind of more aligns with the USAID and what some of their work is. So for us, it's actually been interesting to me as we've gone through today. We've gone from kind of the biggest foreign service agency, which is the State Department, to USAID, to Commerce, and now we're at Ag. So in general, we tend to have about 150 foreign service officers in the entire Foreign Agricultural Service. We also have a large presence here in our headquarters, about 800 civil servants that work for our agency, kind of doing, if you want to say, more day-to-day work on trade policy work and supporting our decision makers. And then we have about 350 locally employed staff that work for us in our FAS offices and U.S. embassies and consulates overseas as well. So we are a lot smaller than State Department or USAID, but that also is because we have kind of a more specialized focus on the different things that we do. One thing to notice on this map is actually kind of where we're located. I know it's pretty small, but in general, it's good to notice these tend to be our offices, like the Foreign Commercial Service, tend to be located in places that are some of our biggest trading partners. We are definitely a trade agency, and that's really reflected in our locations. We also tend to be located in areas with a large port, since we do focus so much on shipping. Now, you might be wondering, kind of out of all the different things that the US government can do overseas, why did it make such a specialized agency such as FAS? And that's really because international trade is so important to the US agricultural industry. And the US ag industry is our biggest stakeholder. So we really focus on how do we support US farmers, ranchers, fishermen, processors, small mom and pops trying to develop their own salsa to get their products overseas. And that's what we do every day. It's also important to recognize that people overseas maybe haven't been exposed to US food and agricultural products. And how do we do that? About 95% of the world's population lives outside the United States. So we want to make sure we reach those potential consumers. One thing to realize is, again, the importance of exports and international trade on US agriculture. If we could actually imagine that the pie chart to the left is about the third of the size it is, that would better reflect kind of how much agricultural trade has grown in total volume, since probably some of you were even alive, since the late 1990s. And this really goes to show how lower tariffs and quotas have really spurred more trade in food and beverage all over the world. So if we think about if you can remember 20 years ago, how often did you eat a blueberry in February? Probably not that often, right? But now it's a lot more common, and you can eat almost anything you want at any time of year. And that's what we focus on. It's also interesting to note that kind of the growth in who we trade with is really related to kind of free trade agreements and the work that we as FAS do as we partner with other government agencies to help US agricultural products get to new markets. What are ag products? It's actually a lot more diverse than many people would assume. We definitely work really closely with some of our farmers in, soybeans, cotton, corn, all sorts of different things. But we also do a lot more that you see on your grocery shelves, both for you and for your pet family members as well. So we help promote different food products. We also do agricultural products, alcoholic beverages. Cotton, we always say that kind of when you actually have the cotton and it's in yarn, then it's FAS. When it turns into a t-shirt, it falls to our colleagues at the Foreign Commercial Service. We also deal with live animals, dairy products, meats, genetics, forestry, all sorts of different things. And I think a lot of us really appreciate that, because every post you go to, even though our job is more specific and focused on agriculture, you're going to tackle some other different type of problem. I know when I was in Mexico, we were negotiating an organics equivalency agreement with Mexico, so that essentially if you can buy it as organic in the United States and it's produced here, it could be sold legally as organic in Mexico and vice versa. Then when I got to Hong Kong, I did actually a lot of work trying to get them to change the alcoholic beverage tariff so that more small batch distilleries could sell their products there. And when I was in Poland, we recently had a lot of issues dealing with exports of US wood pellets there. And how does that help with kind of clean energy products? So even though we're always focused on agriculture, we get to do something a little bit different in every location. And as I mentioned earlier, analysis is a big part of what we do. When USDA placed its first employee overseas over 100 years ago, it was specifically to address data and analysis. And a big part of what we do is public reporting. On this website called the Global Agricultural Information Network, GAIN. It's free and it's available to the public. And my colleagues and I all around the world put out about 2,000 different reports a year that can be related to what is the poultry market like in South Africa, or what is, the product for wine in China for the United States, and what are the regulations that a winery in the US would need to be able to meet those things. We do a lot of reporting, and it's a great idea to get a better sense of kind of how vast our work is and what we do. A lot of us would argue too that when we go out to do reporting on, kind of what is the wheat crop in Poland for that year, it's one of our favorite parts of our job. You really get outside the capital city, you get to know kind of the farmers in the country you're in, you get to learn about different traditions and how they think and why, and it can be absolutely a fascinating experience. We also do work on trade policy, which can overlap a lot with the State Department and with the Foreign Commercial Service. About 15 years ago, trade policy kind of meant everything in this photo. People sitting in a large room arguing over and versus as well as tariffs and quotas. Increasingly, as the US kind of approach to trade has changed, our work related to trade policy has changed as well. Now we do increasingly a lot more work, helping if a shipment is stuck at the port. How do we work to get that released and make sure that there aren't any paperwork issues in the future? How do we explain to a US company, a US exporter of agricultural products, how to get their products into the market and make sure they're successful? So we've actually become a lot more, I would say, detail oriented on the trade policy work. This is just an example again of kind of the volume of agricultural trade and how that shifted over the past couple decades. As you can see in 2001, worldwide, this is not just US exports, this is the whole world, only traded about $1.4 billion worth of tree nuts. In 2021, it was up to 19.7, so almost 20 times the scale of what it was only 20 years ago. So really, I think this also shows how competitive the agricultural trade market is and why the role of FAS is so important to the economic development of agriculture in the United States. Excuse me, sorry. Another part of what we do, very similar to the Foreign Commercial Service, but specific to agricultural products for us, is trade promotion. And we do things all across the world. You can see we help US exporters participate in trade shows and really put out the stars and stripes as the US banner to attract more interest from buyers from all over the world. We do our own little promotions specific to our markets. If that's trying to connect with a different grocery store and get more US products on the shelves, or increasingly social media promotions to try and get food influencers to kind of feature more US ingredients in the recipes they recommend to their followers. So we're doing all sorts of different work to expose hungry people around the world to more US products. And we do this, and luckily we get to be pretty darn successful, we think, by working with the private sector, which again is something we all really enjoy. This is just an example of some of the different associations that we work with at FAS. In general, there's about 80 different nonprofit associations of different agricultural products that we work with almost every day overseas. You can see it can be from raisins to meat, including lamb exports, artisanal cheese exports, sweet potatoes with North Carolina, all sorts of different things. And it can be really interesting to be that connected to the agricultural industry and the producers to help solve problems. Excuse me. Another pillar that we do, again, that kind of ties closely to USAID is capacity building. And for us, what that means is we want to help a country increase their ability to participate in international agricultural trade. So a lot of our work is based on that, informed more in the sense of training. As an example, when we do food aid, if there is unfortunately a drought or a flood, USAID goes in with the emergency help needed for that country. FAS does the longer term development aid. So that's what we're better set up to do. So we do programs such as the McGovern-Dole School for Education program, where we can help monetize agricultural exports to pay for school feeding in developing countries that guarantee that girls go to school as well. We do things like the Cochrane Fellowship Program with our officers overseas finding foreign counterparts who could really benefit from training or more exposure to US agriculture and how that can benefit their country. And we train through Borlaug different PhD candidates from around the world into something that typically related to food security that can help increase nutrition in their home countries. We also increasingly in the past few years have really expanded and tried to share the knowledge of US agriculture and how it relates to climate change. How do we produce more to feed the world and its growing population with fewer emissions? So we've been really glad to see kind of the difference that that's making, even as this week at COP29 as our secretary arrives tomorrow. And one last thing, only you could prevent forest fires. We're always very excited that Smokey Bear is one of the official members of the U.S. Department of Agriculture and our Foreign Service. So just a good little memory there. One other thing I guess I would say is in terms of hiring, the Foreign Agricultural Service for our Foreign Service hires about every 2 years. The application closed just a little bit ago. So please mark your calendars, think about 18 months to 24 months from now when it opens again. And we do that because we tend to hire kind of in different batches. If you're interested in a civil service position or a position related to capacity building work with FAS, like my colleague said, those are always available on USA Jobs. I definitely recommend creating an account and creating a filter so it'll automatically send you emails when different positions become available so you know kind of what's out there. And I think that is about it. So thank you so much, Katie, and I appreciate it. Looking forward to some questions. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Alicia. And thanks again to all of our panelists. I will invite you all to come back up on video so we can start responding to a few of the questions that we've gotten in the chat. Thank you everyone for your awesome questions. I've been curiously taking some notes and compiling them. And so I'm really looking forward to getting the opportunity to go through them. I think one thing that I would love to ask all of our panelists to kick off is just if you all can explain a little bit more about your journey to get to where you are. What was your educational experience? Were there any relevant professional experiences that you had before joining the federal government that you think actually really made a difference in your advancement to your current role that you'd like to speak to? We had a couple questions related to that, so that would be really helpful. Thanks.
I can go ahead and start if you don't mind. So I have been in for 25 years, and there's really no right or wrong answer to how to get into the State Department. I'm going to put in the chat right now, we are actually looking for certain skills. I mean, I know every job has a number of competencies. We are looking for what we call the dimensions. I put them in the chat just now. They're on our website. These are 11 skills that are going to make a difference when you're applying for the State Department. The key is we're not necessarily looking for where you got them. So my path, I actually didn't know anything about the State Department when I was growing up in the Chicago area. I went to the University of Iowa as a pharmacy major. Did not like that. About halfway through, I changed majors and graduated with a degree in psychology. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I ended up working in a music company for 2 years. But I'd always wanted to go overseas. So I figured out, how do I do this? I got a job teaching English overseas in Japan. So it's a great way to kind of start an international experience. They're always looking for teachers. This was back in the 90s, but Japan is still looking for English teachers. So I went, I did a contract, loved it, traveled around Asia for a couple of years, got another job teaching English in Thailand. And at some point, I had to go into an embassy to get new pages in my passport because I'd been traveling so much. And that was the first time that I was like, oh, embassies, who are you people? How do you get this job? And so I know there are people that have had this in the back of their mind since they were in high school. They're really interested in that. That was not me. And that's okay. Because again, we hire all majors. We're not looking at your major. If you're a psychology major, that's great. What we're looking for are people who are intellectually curious. And I guess the fact that I did a little bit of science, I did psychology, then I worked at a music company, so I knew that. I traveled. That was basically showing that I had this broad body of knowledge that I had gained over many, many years. I was not sure I could pass the test. So I did go back to school. I did get a master's degree in international relations, but I will tell you, you don't need a master's degree. You don't need to have studied international relations. If you are well-read, I look back and I think I should have just taken the test because maybe I could have saved myself a lot of money. If you want to get a master's degree, by all means do that, but it is not required for the State Department. But as I put in the chat, there are dimensions that we look for: cultural adaptability, negotiation skills, leadership skills, organizational skills. If you come from a background where you have lived overseas or traveled overseas, that's great. Don't think that is what's going to get you a job with us. You have to link that directly to the dimensions. How did that experience develop one of those dimensions? And that's what you need to be telling us. Giving me a resume that says you studied overseas or you did an internship with the State Department in itself is not enough. You have to be telling us how that helped you gain the dimensions. And that's what you need to tell us when you are applying for the State Department. So again, all backgrounds, but just you have to be intellectually curious and show us that you've gained some of those skills.
I can go next. I'm from Minnesota too. I'll just throw this little fun tidbit that I always like to share with my panelists now. I used to be a backup singer for Prince, and also a group called the Sounds of Blackness. And that led me to singing with other people like Janet Jackson, etc. And I'm not saying that just, very casually. I'm saying that to say my path into the Foreign Service was zigzagged in that my father moved us overseas when I was 12. And he worked for the United Nations Development Project in Burkina Faso, West Africa. And so I got that exposure early. I went to an all French school where, surprisingly enough, I had to take a foreign language. So I was learning French and Spanish at the same time, which at the age of 12, I hated. I thought it was the worst thing ever. And then, I kept telling my father, I want to be a famous singer. And he's like, well, what's your plan B in case that doesn't work? And he got his Bachelor of Science in the Foreign Service at Georgetown. So he was kind of trying to push me to go get a degree, get my Master's of Science in the Foreign Service. And I just really wasn't interested in that. And so I worked for a couple non-governmental organizations or USAID implementing partners. And through that, eventually met a lot of USAID folks. And then that sort of was my track into USAID. And I will also say that for what I saw a question, what excites you? What's the most about your day? So we too at USAID, you spend most of your career as a Foreign Service officer overseas, but every 12 years or so, they want to bring us back to the United States, re-Americanize us, remind us that, our gifts are from the American people, which you'll see under the USAID logo. And so I'm on a domestic assignment. I'm 2 years into a 3-year tour of a domestic assignment. And so I chose to come back and become what Susan does, is called a development diplomat in residence. And our program, we have 2 people covering the entire United States, whereas you heard Susan say that they have 17 people. So I kind of cover whatever state sometimes people throw my way, but I officially cover Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. But now I've kind of been assigned Minnesota and Montana and South Dakota and North Dakota. And so, but if someone reaches out to me from Buffalo, New York, I respond to them as well. So what excites me is I love to teach. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Gabon from 1989 to 1991. And I realized that I really have a love of teaching, and I have a love of mentoring and coaching. And so in this particular position, it's nice because I have people constantly seeking out advice. What should I do? How did you get to where you are? So it's nice as I'm thinking of sunsetting my career, in about 5 or 6 years. I probably do one more overseas tour, but it's time for a new generation. It's time for for me to move out and for someone else to move in. And so I love talking to people such as these panel discussions to tell you, hey, apply, because a person from Minnesota like me, like you, if you're from Minnesota, you too, I went to St. Olaf College in Minnesota, and I went to Forest Lake High School in Forest Lake, Minnesota for 1 year. But a Minnesotan can go and see the world and make such an impact and make a difference in the world. And so you don't have to, sort of say, well, I'm from Minnesota. I don't speak a foreign language. I didn't have the same opportunities as you, Penelope. What can I do being a Minnesotan? And I'd say volunteer, make sure that you're practicing those soft skills, hard skills. Be flexible, be adaptable, be approachable, be personable. And we have something in the Foreign Service, and I'm sure Susan will agree with me. It's called a corridor reputation, and you can get a reputation, and that really matters. And sometimes can affect your assignments if people feel that you're unapproachable, you're mean, you're difficult to talk to, you don't listen, you don't show empathy. That can sometimes impact your assignments, because people will say, I don't want to work with you. And I can tell you that in my 25-year career, some of the same people have cycled around. The diplomat in residence down here in Atlanta now, he and I were most recently in Pakistan together. So it's nice, working with him again. So yeah, just be flexible, be open, be honest, be kind, be sincere, be genuine, be caring, be understanding. Know yourself, your likes and your dislikes. And that's really important, because the career that you think you might want may not necessarily be the career that you end up with, i.e. backup singer for Prince, now doing international development. So I'm able to marry the two, because I do usually sing the national anthem at the 4th of July celebration at our American embassy. So, I was able to kind of link those two together, and I get to use my foreign language skills all around the world. And if you don't have one, we will teach you a foreign language to the country you're assigned. Over.
Penelope, you're so multi-talented. It's amazing. Thanks for being so inspiring.
Everybody's multi-talented on this panel, but thank you.
That's right. Doug or Alicia, do you want to share just a little more about what led you to your current role, either education or prior experiences? And then we'll try to get to a few more questions.
Doug, do you want to go first?
Go ahead, please. Please, over to you.
Yeah, for me, I am originally from San Diego, California. I grew up about 20 miles from the border with Mexico. So I always wanted to learn Spanish as another language, because I figured, how was I going to be successful at home if I only spoke English? And that was the first thing that kind of exposed me to kind of borders beyond the United States. And after studying abroad in Brazil, actually, so not Spanish for sure, I definitely got kind of the bug that I wanted to go back overseas. I pursued a little bit a career as an English language teacher, but I am not very patient. So that was not a great skill for a teacher. I think we've all been there. So I definitely reevaluated when I was overseas what I was doing. And I decided to go to graduate school in Latin American studies, because that was where my interest lied, to kind of better figure things out. And as a result, I got a grant in graduate school to go back to Brazil and study sugar markets and ethanol. So I was really interested in renewable fuels, and ended up through that kind of getting a job here at USDA. I won't say how many years ago again, but it was literally just a phone call of calling until somebody answered, and then you could explain how to get a job application accepted by FAS. One thing I would say is I've seen a couple questions about USA jobs and how that works. Is kind of in general, look at the language they're asking you for. Sometimes you're very specialized in what you do and you know it inside and out. Sometimes the people reviewing those applications are not as familiar with the specific work of that position. So try and use that language to answer the questions and connect it to how, if your experience is related to management of people, I think similar to what Penelope was alluding to, for us, you need to kind of work well with other people. When you go overseas, you're going to be, for us, in a small office leading a team, and you need to be a good colleague. If you can tie it to those types of things. For us economics is a requirement. It doesn't mean you need a degree in economics, but you must have in your educational background or your professional background enough things to demonstrate that you understand agricultural trade and supply and demand, or something along those lines, because we do so much related to trade. But yeah, I would say it's just been really interesting. I think a lot of us in FAS kind of would say we find the agency by accident, as we were looking for something else and found a report, and we're like, what is this agency? And that's how most of us end up here. But it's really interesting. And again, I think a lot of us would say every assignment is totally different, but we love coming to work every day and getting to help people solve problems and create jobs in the US and meet people from all over the world. It's just been an incredible experience. So thanks.
Yeah, and very, very quickly for me, I after doing graduate school at St. Thomas University in St. Paul, I did some internships at some Minnesota companies, multinational companies, which there are a lot of, as all of you know, in Minnesota. and then a small and medium-sized company. And then I joined the U.S. Department of Commerce office in Minneapolis, which I referenced before, doing international trade counseling, working with companies to develop export plans and things like that. And then but then also working with our folks over in the embassies and consulates to find partners and things like that. I would just say that at least for the Foreign Commercial Service, I think having a business background is particularly helpful. Just understanding sales cycles, understanding finance, and other things that go with private sector, because our main interlocutors are, we're working similar, I think, to FAS, working with U.S. companies, working with the organizations to sell stuff overseas. So being able to understand that is pretty helpful in Foreign Commercial Service. But when I think of my colleagues, like their educational backgrounds, it's all over. Really, microbiology, it could be economics, it could be political science, it could be language, history, and so forth. So there's no real mold in terms of that. Hope that helps. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you all. I really appreciate that. We've had a bunch of questions about kind of what it takes, what the background looks like, and it's encouraging to hear you can come from pretty much any walk of life and find a career in your respective departments. I'm wondering, we've had a couple of questions about international or overseas postings, either with a spouse or a partner or with kids, and what that looks like and what the opportunities are there. Maybe, there's obviously some challenges, but how you navigate that, if you have, or how your peers have navigated that. I think that'd be great.
If anyone doesn't mind that I jump in, sorry, Susan. I think for me, my husband and I do not have children, so I haven't had as much exposure to international education. But I would say most colleagues do tend to have children, so people do it all the time, thousands every year. I would say for us, having a spouse who wants to be employed and have a career, that is definitely a big challenge, right? Because almost every post, they start from zero, right? So it's not a normal trajectory. I would say the State Department, and kudos to them, has really worked to try and create more programs to make that easier for spouses going forward. And I think, oddly enough, I would argue, spousal employment in the Foreign Service in general kind of benefited from COVID. I think, as you can see now, we're all on Zoom. People became a lot more accustomed to telework. So it's really opened up a lot more opportunities for spouses and partners to continue their own jobs and kind of follow their spouse around the world in a way that honestly probably wasn't even possible 5 years ago. So it's not easy. I'm not going to say that it is, but I do think it's trending in the right direction. And I think there's been a lot more opportunities going forward, especially in terms of spousal employment. It can be difficult. You miss stuff with your own family, right? You can't come home all the time, depending on how far around the world you are, right? So unfortunately, you might miss some big events, but I do think for most of us, definitely the pros outweigh the cons, and it makes us cherish our time that much more when we're back here in the US and closer to family and make sure we get to reconnect. So thanks.
Thanks, Alicia. Does anyone, maybe Susan, you want to add something?
Yeah, I would agree with what Alicia says. I came in when I was single. I did 2 assignments alone and then came back to Washington, met my husband. He didn't know what he was getting himself into. So the thing about spousal employment, all embassies will put aside several jobs for spouses. They're not necessarily going to be in what your spouse's field is or what they want to do. My husband worked in everything from the mailroom to doing visa fraud investigation. But I agree, COVID changed the landscape completely. And now we actually have positions that are State Department positions that they will hire spouses for DC-based positions that they can then work remotely from their spouse's overseas assignment. I also think, a lot of people now, their jobs are more portable because of all this new technology. Some spouses are in education, which is always useful because most assignments have international schools. So that's the other piece of it. I've raised 2 kids in the Foreign Service. We have schools not every country is going to have an adequate school. Many do. We have an Office of Overseas Schools that evaluates schools in every country that says if they're adequate all the way up to 12th grade or maybe 6th grade. The State Department pays for these schools because we know your kids aren't necessarily going to speak the local language in every country. So they have to go to these expensive international schools, American schools, British schools, whatever might be present, but they pay for them. If they are not adequate, at least for the State Department, I know that we have the option. We can still go to an assignment where the schools are not adequate, and they will pay to send our children to boarding school somewhere. That's not for everybody, but for some people, it might be an option. So I've raised 2 kids. When kids are little, they are portable. They don't have a lot of opinions. I will say that once they get a little bit older, and this is absolutely true for spouses, it has to be a family decision where you are going. You can't just say, we're going to this country and you all just live with it. This is a lifestyle as much as it is a career. And so your family really has to be on board. So when I would get my big list of what would be possible assignments, I would give that to my husband before I even looked at it. And I would say, okay, cross off anywhere you know you don't want to go. And then that would be my list of assignments. So there's different ways families do it, but it has to be a family decision, I would say.
I have nothing to add. Great insights from Alicia and Susan. Tough act to follow. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I
have
really
nothing, I have nothing to add, either, well, other than it can be a little bit complicated, to make sure that your spouse, feels, that they're making a valuable contribution, and they are, and, you just have to, you have to talk about that. I have gotten divorced in the Foreign Service, and so, but, just happily married again, and just came back off of my honeymoon, and so, it's awesome. I met someone in the United States, but he's so excited to go overseas and has been overseas himself as a Marine. And so it's really important to have a conversation with your partner and to have work-life balance, right? Because I have to admit, as a single employee, I didn't hesitate to work like Christmas Eve, or, when some of my colleagues had boundaries and they had to take summer vacation. So I could take vacation in April or March and come back, to make sure that there was coverage. So I think, being sensible. And I think since I joined the Foreign Service 25 years ago, there's been so many flexible policies and programs, and Susan, you'll probably agree, that have been put into place that, work-life balance. Back when I joined in the early 2000s, it's like, what is that? You come and you're on call 24 hours a day, your phone rings at 2 a.m. and you're hoping that it's not a death or in your family or some crisis. But now I think there's a lot more boundaries and a lot more work-life balance that, is acceptable. Over.
excellent. Thanks to everyone for sharing a little bit more about both kind of the positives, the optimistic pieces, and also the challenges that come with having a family and the rest of your life when you're doing overseas postings. One question that maybe we can do quickly, because I'm cognizant that we only have a few minutes left, and a lot of questions, is just how much interaction do you have across departments, and how do the different departments work together? A number of you mentioned that you do similar work at times. Maybe USAID and the Foreign Agricultural Service do some crossover. Susan and Penelope, you mentioned some crossover as well. Just, yeah, how often do you find yourselves crossing over, and how does that work in practice? Big question, sorry.
I guess I would say I find it so much easier to work together overseas sometimes than back here in Washington. I think because we're all most of the time very much in the same building. You're walking by each other as you go to the hallway. It feels almost like any other office, private sector office that you might work in, just a different department, right, as you're walking around. So I think overseas too, it can be really great because the embassy usually comes with a really good community, right? Everyone's going through a similar experience. Everyone's moving their family every couple of years. So there really can become a tight bond, both professionally as we're getting our work done, but I think personally too. And you will make friends with colleagues that'll be your friends for decades to come, and great places to go visit when you're on vacation too. So I think for us, it does overseas, though I find it maybe coming back in Washington, which is very bureaucratic, but a lot easier to make connections overseas and just literally walk down the hall and ask Susan kind of what she's working on and could she help me with something. So I don't know, but that's been my experience so far. And it's interesting because you always learn something else from another agency that you didn't know that they did.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead, Penelope.
I was going to say there's also something overseas in the embassy called Country Team, and that is head up by the ambassador, and usually the head of the Foreign Affairs Agency, the representatives, sits in that Country Team meeting. and they talk about what's going on. So for USAID, it's the mission director that sits as part of the ambassador's country team, and you have the deputy chief of mission. So the ambassador is called the chief of mission, and then you have the deputy chief of mission. And so they are really connected. There are opportunities. When I was in Pakistan, for example, and when Afghanistan was being evacuated, there were opportunities for all of us to work together, to try to help with that resettlement program. And so you really do work as a country team. And everywhere I've been, the ambassador has said, whether you're from Foreign Agriculture Service, Department of Commerce, State Department, USAID, we are one team, one mission. And so we do, it's imperative that you work together on so many things. Housing, just you really have to work together. And that's where that interpersonal relationships really comes in handy, and is crucial to being a member on the embassy-wide team.
I would just say I love what Alicia said about always learning. I think whether it's Washington, D.C., or whether it's overseas at a particular embassy or consulate, the more we as diplomats or government employees know about what other agencies do on a day-to-day basis when it comes to international trade, because there's just so many groups that are there to support. At least I'm thinking from a U.S. company perspective, Export-Import Bank, it's a Foreign Agriculture Service, it's a U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. There's so many different Bureau of Industry and Security on export controls, that we don't have to always know everything about what Export-Import Bank or what the Foreign Agriculture Service does. I don't have to, but if I know a little bit, and if I can provide the right introductions, then I feel like I've done my job in supporting U.S. industry. So hope that helps a little bit. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, I was going to say maybe before we wrap up, I could just ask each of you for 30 seconds. We had a question in the Q&A about how you all prioritize self-care and taking care of yourselves in really potentially challenging environments, both domestically and overseas. So if you can find a way to summarize that in 30 seconds, we'll conclude on maybe a positive note there.
I will say one nice thing about the State Department and the Foreign Service is that some jobs are more intense than others, and you have the opportunity throughout your kind of life cycle to do those jobs that are really intense when that works for you and your family, and to kind of take a step back when you need to. So when my kids were infants, I had 2 kids under 2 at one point. I wasn't going to Moscow because those kinds of jobs are intense. Washington has a laser focus on them. I went to Rwanda, which may sound intense, but it actually was a great place for little kids because I was doing the public affairs job. There's not a lot of hair on fire kind of things going on. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in the career to kind of flex, to be more intense when you can be, and to back off when you need to be. And I've always appreciated that.
So I love massages, pedicures, manicures. I'm a girly girl. I love buying lipstick, wearing fancy neck scarves. And so, I have to say, Nordstrom gets a lot of my business, but I don't have that overseas. So I have to get it in doses, right? But sometimes just getting a good, finding a good masseuse I own my own massage table. So, and overseas, it's a lot more, it's less expensive than it is in the United States. But sometimes if I've had a rough day, just getting that foot massage or getting a massage, or getting a manicure or pedicure, that's sort of my go-to. And maybe binging on Homeland or The Ambassador or Madam Secretary, or so I can still stay in touch with that, and then compare and say, they don't have that badge, that color in the embassy. That's not really how it works. So that's sort of my go-to for relaxation.
For me, setting boundaries, definitely. I think we all work for international organizations, as do I think a lot of the folks who are on this call. And that's hard to do, when you're working with different time zones, but setting boundaries is important. Then for me, exercising, like I'm a big runner, so just getting out and moving is important for me personally.
I agree with Doug. I think boundaries are important. I admit I'm not always great at keeping those boundaries. Considering our work with Asia, that could be easier said than done sometimes. But and yeah, exercise for me, it's something when I'm bidding to go out on a post, for example, I love to swim, and that's my place. Like I can't have my phone with me when I'm in the pool, so it's a great thing. Is like I look for those types of things, right? Like what do I have the ability to do the things that are going to help me relax? And I would also agree with Susan. I think sometimes, you know, you're going for it and other times you need to step back. I think like my most recent overseas assignment in Poland, covering 6 countries by myself when Russia invaded Ukraine and all the work on food security, it burned me out. I'm no joke. It was 2 years of only 2 weekends of not working. It was insane. And so I asked to come home. I was like, I need a break. I can't. Luckily they understood, right? And they said, yeah, we're going to bring you back to Washington, be closer to family and make that work. And again, I would say just have a better sense of what's going on and what to do differently going forward. So I do appreciate that is that flexibility and we have options of if a position is not working for you, it's not like you have to quit your whole career, right? There's different options you can move around and really adapt that to whatever is best for you and your family and what's going on at that time. So I know my husband and I both really appreciated that.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. Again, we're going to have to stop there. I know there were a lot of very specific or personal questions about individual experiences that were dropped in the chat. And so after this, we will follow up with an email to everyone that registered with just some more ways that you can connect with our panelists and maybe ask further questions either via email or newsletter. So keep an eye out for that today. And I will just put a plug in for some of our upcoming events if you haven't already heard about them. We'll be hosting our Global Business Outlook, which is an in-person only event on December 5th that covers global business mega trends and is a great networking opportunity in the Twin Cities. On December 12th, we have our International Trivia Competition, which is also in-person only. It's really fun. We do it every year. Lots of teams from all over the state come together to do very nerdy international trivia. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, on January 23rd, we'll have our annual U.S. foreign policy update. That one is available both virtually and in person. So if there are folks joining from outside of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, I welcome you to sign up for that as well. And that's a great look ahead at all things U.S. foreign policy, especially with a changing administration. I know lots of us have questions. It'll be a particularly timely session. So with that, I will say thank you, a big thank you to our panelists for their time, their expertise. This has been super helpful, so relevant. We're really grateful for you sharing your experiences with us. Thanks again. And thanks to everyone who joined. Stay in touch with Global Minnesota and we'll send some follow-up shortly. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.